My daughter called me, and her voice was ice cold. "We are leaving tomorrow, Dad. Your beach house has already been sold. Bye." I froze holding the phone, but I managed to reply. "But you forgot one thing, Tiffany." She laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. "What are you talking about, old man? Your heart medication." "No," I said calmly. "You forgot that the house you just sold was actually not yours to sell." Before she could scream, I hung up. I am Harrison Blake, 70 years old, and I was about to teach my ungrateful daughter and her parasite boyfriend a lesson they would never forget. If you have ever been betrayed by the very people you sacrificed your life for, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. It comforts me to know I am not alone in this fight. The engine of my Ford F-150 hummed a steady rhythm as I navigated the winding coastal highway towards Malibu. It had been a 4-hour drive from the city, but my hands were steady on the wheel. I was not driving to relax. I was driving to surprise them. In the passenger seat sat a box of organic strawberries, Lydia's favorite. My late wife loved them, and today would have been our 45th anniversary. Even though she had been gone for 3 years, I still kept the tradition alive. I wanted to share them with Tiffany, my only daughter. I thought maybe, just maybe, if we sat on the terrace of the house I built, we could find a way back to each other. The house. We called it the Glass Horizon. It was not just a building. It was my masterpiece. As the former chief architect of one of Florida's biggest firms, I had designed skyscrapers and museums, but nothing compared to this. I spent 5 years sketching every angle, ensuring that when the sun set, the light would filter through the living room exactly how Lydia liked it. Every beam of teak wood, every pane of hurricane-proof glass, every stone in the driveway was placed by my hands or under my supervision. It was the physical embodiment of my love for my wife. I had let Tiffany and her boyfriend Greg stay there for the summer because they said they needed to save money. I thought I was helping. I turned the final corner, expecting to see the familiar bronze gates gleaming in the afternoon sun. Instead, I slammed on the brakes. My tires screeched on the asphalt, leaving black marks that mirrored the sudden darkness in my heart. The remote control for the gate was clipped to my visor. I pressed it. Nothing happened. I pressed it again, harder this time, my thumb turning white. The heavy steel gates, which I had installed with a custom hydraulic system, remained stubbornly shut. Panic began to rise in my chest, not the panic of fear, but the panic of confusion. I rolled down the window and leaned out, and that was when I saw it. Stuck into the manicured zoysia grass of the front lawn was a sign. A wooden sign with bold red letters that screamed one word: sold. My breath hitched. Impossible. I turned off the engine and stepped out of the truck. The ocean breeze hit my face, but it felt cold today. I walked up to the keypad mounted on the stone pillar. I punched in the code: 1014. Lydia's birthday. The light flashed red. Access denied. I tried again. Denied. They had changed the code. They had locked me out of my own creation. My hands were shaking now, not from age, but from a rage that was starting to boil deep in my gut. I looked through the bars of the gate. The driveway was empty of Tiffany's car, but there was a strange black SUV parked near the garage. I needed to get in. I did not care that I was 70 years old. I did not care that my doctor told me to avoid strenuous activity. This was my sanctuary. I walked along the perimeter fence until I found the spot where the bougainvillea grew thickest. I used to trim it myself, but it had been neglected for months. I grabbed the iron bars, my leather loafers finding purchase on the stone base. I hoisted myself up. My shoulders screamed in protest, a sharp reminder of my arthritis, but I gritted my teeth and pulled. I swung my leg over the top, dropping down onto the soft mulch on the other side. I landed heavily, stumbling slightly, but I did not fall. I straightened my blazer, dusted off my hands, and began to march up the driveway. That was when I heard the sound. Thwack! Smash! Laughter. It was coming from the front lawn near the infinity pool. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. As I rounded the corner of the house, the scene before me made my blood run cold. Greg was there, Tiffany's boyfriend. He was wearing a pristine white polo shirt and plaid shorts, looking every bit the country club member he pretended to be. He was holding a golf club, a 9-iron by the looks of it. But he was not hitting golf balls. Lined up on the edge of the pool deck were 3 ceramic vases. My stomach dropped. I knew those vases. They were blue glazed with intricate white patterns. Lydia had made them. She had taken pottery classes in her final years, finding peace in the clay when the cancer began to take her strength. Those were not just pots. They were parts of her soul. Greg adjusted his stance, wiggling his hips in a mockery of a professional golfer. "Watch this, babe," he shouted to no one in particular. He swung the club. The metal head connected with the center vase. There was a sickening crunch. The blue ceramic exploded into 1,000 shards, scattering across the patio and splashing into the pool. "Score!" Greg yelled, pumping his fist in the air. That one felt like a birdie. My vision blurred. A red mist descended over my eyes. I felt a roar build up in my throat, a primal sound that I did not know I was capable of making. "What are you doing?" I screamed. My voice echoed off the glass walls of the house. Greg jumped, spinning around so fast he almost tripped over his own expensive golf shoes. He lowered the club, but he did not look afraid. He looked annoyed. He squinted at me, shielding his eyes from the sun. "Who the hell are you?" he barked. I stepped forward, my fists clenched at my sides. "I am the man who owns the ground you are standing on. And those vases belong to my wife." Greg laughed. It was a dry, dismissive sound. "Oh, right. You must be the dad. Tiffany said you might show up eventually. But she said you were in a nursing home or something." He rested the golf club on his shoulder, casually pointing the metal head towards me like a weapon. "Look, old man, I do not know how you got in here, but you are trespassing. This property is sold. The new owners take possession tomorrow morning. So why do you not do us both a favor and turn around and walk back out before I have to call security?" I looked at the shattered remains of Lydia's vase floating in the pool water. I looked at the smug grin on this man's face. A man who had never built anything in his life, who lived off the generosity of others and destroyed what he could not understand. "You have 5 seconds, I said, my voice low and dangerous. 5 seconds to put that club down and get off my property before I make you regret the day you met my daughter." Greg sneered and took a step towards me, raising the golf club higher. "Or what? You are going to throw your back out yelling at me? Get lost, Grandpa. This is the real world. And in the real world, possession is 9/10 of the law." He was about to learn that in my world, the law was something far more complicated, and I was the one who wrote the rules. The glass door leading to the living room slid open with a soft hiss. I expected an apology. I expected my daughter to run out and push her boyfriend away to tell him he had crossed a line. But Tiffany did not run. She sauntered. She walked out onto the patio holding a flute of champagne in one hand and a thick folded document in the other. She was wearing a silk caftan that I recognized. It was her mother's. Lydia had bought it in Italy on our 30th anniversary. Seeing it draped over Tiffany's shoulders while she looked at me with such utter disdain felt like a physical blow to my stomach. "Dad," she sighed, rolling her eyes as if my presence was a minor inconvenience like a stain on the carpet, or a cloud on a sunny day. "You are embarrassing yourself. Please stop shouting. The neighbors are going to call the police, and that would just be a hassle for everyone." I looked from Greg, who was still smirking with his golf club, to Tiffany, my only child, the girl I had carried on my shoulders along this very beach. The girl whose tuition at private schools cost more than most people earn in a decade. "Tiffany," I choked out, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. Do you see what he is doing? He is destroying your mother's things, and the gate, the sign. What is going on here? Tiffany took a sip of champagne, the bubbles catching the light. Greg is just blowing off steam, Dad. Moving is stressful. And as for what is going on, it is very simple. We are liquidating assets. Liquidating. I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. This is not an asset, Tiffany. This is our home. This is the glass horizon. I built this with my own hands. You cannot sell it. She laughed then. It was a cold sound, devoid of any warmth or humanity. Oh, Dad, you are so dramatic. And technically, I can sell it. In fact, I already have. She raised the document in her hand. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed it at me. The papers fluttered through the air and landed on the stone pavers at my feet. I did not want to pick them up, but I had to know. I knelt down my knees, protesting against the hard stone, and gathered the pages. My eyes scanned the text. It was a durable power of attorney. My signature was at the bottom, shaky and weak, but undeniably mine. I remember when I signed this. It was 11 months ago. I had suffered a minor stroke. I was lying in a hospital bed, unable to speak clearly, my right side numb and useless. Tiffany had sat by my bedside, holding my hand, tears streaming down her face. She told me she wanted to help handle the bills while I recovered. She told me she would protect my legacy. I trusted her. I trusted her with my life and my fortune because she was my blood. I looked up at her, clutching the paper. You used this, I whispered. You used the authority I gave you when I was sick to sell my house behind my back. Tiffany shrugged, adjusting her sunglasses. You say sick, Dad. I say incompetent. You have not been the same since the stroke. You are slow. You are emotional. You are a burden. The word hung in the salty air between us. Burden. Greg chuckled, stepping up beside her and wrapping an arm around her waist. She is right, old man. Do you have any idea how expensive it is to keep you in that lifestyle? The country club fees the medical bills. We are doing you a favor. We are cashing out so we can manage the money better. I stood up, clutching the paper so hard it tore. How much, I asked. My voice was dangerously quiet. How much did you sell it for? $5 million, Tiffany said, proudly lifting her chin. All cash. The wire transfer hits our account tomorrow morning. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I felt dizzy. 5 million. You fools, I shouted, losing my composure. You absolute idiots. This property was appraised at $12 million last year. The land alone is worth $8 million. You sold it for less than half its value. You gave away $7 million. Why? Greg stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and arrogance. Because we need the cash now, old man. Not in 6 months. Now. There is a pre-sale for a new cryptocurrency launching in Dubai next week. If we get in early with 5 million, we can flip it to 50 million in a month. You do not understand modern finance. You are stuck in the past with your bricks and mortar. I stared at them in horror. They had not just stolen my home. They had burned my legacy for a gambling addiction. They were trading a masterpiece of architecture for magic internet money. This sale is fraud, I yelled, stepping toward Tiffany. I am revoking this power of attorney right now. I am not incapacitated. I am standing right here. I reached out to grab Tiffany's arm to shake some sense into hers, to make her look at me and realize what she was doing. I wanted to tear that document into 1,000 pieces, but I never reached her. Greg moved with the speed of a younger man. He dropped the golf club and shoved me, 2 hands hard against my chest. I stumbled back. My heel caught on the edge of a paving stone. I flailed my arms trying to find balance, but there was nothing to grab. I fell backwards, hitting the ground hard. The air was knocked out of my lungs with a painful whoosh. My head cracked against the stone, not hard enough to knock me out, but hard enough to make stars dance in my vision. Dad, Tiffany squeaked, but she did not move to help me. She just took a step back, clutching her champagne glass to her chest, as if afraid I might spill it. Greg stood over me, casting a long shadow that blocked out the sun. He looked down at me with pure contempt. "Don't touch her," he spat. "And don't bother tearing up the papers. Those are just copies. The originals are already with the title company. The notary stamped them yesterday. It is done." He leaned down, his face inches from mine. "You are powerless. You are just a guest here now, and a very rude one. The new owner, Victor, takes possession at 9 a.m. tomorrow. If I were you, I would get in that old truck and drive as far away as possible. Because if you are still here when Victor arrives, he won't be as nice as I am." I lay there on the cold stone, the taste of blood in my mouth where I had bitten my tongue. I looked at Tiffany. She refused to meet my eyes. She turned her gaze to the ocean, watching the waves crash against the shore, indifferent to the father lying at her feet. "Get out," Greg said, straightening up and pointing to the gate. "Get out before I call the cops and tell them a senile old man is attacking my girlfriend." I struggled to my elbows, my body aching, my pride shattered. I realized then that words would not work. Logic would not work. Love certainly would not work. They had crossed a bridge and burned it behind them. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up. I dusted the sand and dirt off my blazer. I did not look at Greg. I looked straight at Tiffany. "Enjoy your champagne," I said, my voice hoarse but steady. "Celebrate your victory tonight. Because tomorrow, reality is going to hit you harder than you can imagine." I turned around and began the long walk back to my truck. I did not run. I did not look back. But as I walked, I reached into my pocket and touched the cold metal of my phone. They thought the power of attorney was the ultimate weapon. They thought the stroke had made me weak. They were about to find out that while my body might be slower, my mind was sharper than ever, and they had forgotten the one thing I valued more than money: the truth. I climbed into my truck and slammed the door. My hands were shaking as I put the key in the ignition. Not from fear this time, but from a cold, calculated resolve. I needed to make a phone call, and I knew exactly who to call. The sun was setting on the glass horizon, casting long shadows across the house I built. It looked beautiful. It looked peaceful, but inside a war had just begun. I stood up slowly, dusting the sand from my trousers, but the physical pain in my back was nothing compared to the sudden, terrifying thought that gripped my chest. If they had sold the house, that meant they had cleared the house. Real estate agents, especially the sharks who deal in quick cash transactions, always want a blank canvas. They call it depersonalizing. I called it erasing a life. I looked past Tiffany towards the large glass windows of the master bedroom on the second floor. That room was a shrine. On the nightstand sat a rosewood jewelry box I had carved for Lydia on our first Christmas. Inside was not diamonds or gold, but the charm bracelet she wore every day and the locket with my picture. Next to it was the last photograph ever taken of her smiling in the hospital garden. "Where are her things?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Tiffany was busy checking her nails, clearly bored with the conversation. She did not even look up. "What things, Dad?" "Be specific." "We got rid of a lot of junk." My heart hammered against my ribs. The jewelry box, the photo frame, the clothes in the closet, the knitting basket by the window. Tiffany let out a long, exasperated sigh. "Oh, that old stuff. God, Dad, you really are a hoarder." The staging consultant said the house looked like a mausoleum. Nobody wants to buy a house that smells like sick old people. We had to make it look modern, minimalist. You know, sleek. I took a step forward, disregarding Greg, who tensed up, ready to push me again. "I asked you where they are, Tiffany. Did you put them in storage?" "Please tell me you put them in storage." She laughed, and this time it was a nervous sound, as if she finally realized she might have gone too far, but she was too proud to admit it. Storage costs money, Dad, and we are trying to maximize profit here, not waste it on boxes of moth-eaten wool and fake jewelry. She pointed a manicured finger towards the side of the house near the service entrance, where the garbage trucks usually pulled up. We called a hauler this morning, she said. They took the big furniture. The small stuff, the clutter we just tossed out back. The junk removal guys are coming to pick it up tomorrow before the closing. I did not wait for her to finish. I ran. Or at least I moved as fast as my 70-year-old legs would carry me. I rounded the corner of the house, my breath coming in ragged gasps. There it was. A pile. A mound of garbage bags and loose items heaped carelessly on the wet grass. It looked like a landfill site in the middle of paradise. My knees gave way, and I fell to the ground, right next to the heap. I began to tear at the black plastic bags. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the plastic. I ripped open the first bag. My own clothes. My drafting shirts, my old sweaters. I tossed them aside. I did not care about my things. I opened the second bag. Bed sheets, towels. Then I saw it. Lying in the mud, not even in a bag. The rosewood box. It was cracked. The delicate hinge I had spent hours oiling and adjusting was snapped. The lid was open. I reached for it, praying the contents were safe. It was empty. The velvet lining was torn. Where is it? I muttered to myself, digging frantically into the pile. Where is the locket? I pushed aside a broken lamp and a stack of books. My hands touched something soft and wet. I froze. I pulled it out. It was a scarf. A lavender wool scarf. Lydia had been knitting this in her final weeks. She wanted to finish it for Tiffany's birthday. She used to sit in the armchair by the window, her thin hands working the needles, trying to leave one last piece of warmth for her daughter. She never finished it. The needles were still threaded through the yarn when she passed. I had left it exactly as it was in the basket, untouched for 3 years. Now here it was, dragged through the mud. The knitting needles were gone, probably snapped or stolen. The soft wool was soaked with dirty water. But that was not the worst part. As I held the ruin of my wife's final labor of love up to the light, I saw a burn mark. A small round black hole singed into the lavender wool, and right next to it, stuck in the fibers, was a cigarette butt. I recognized the brand. It was Greg's. He had stood here smoking while he watched them throw his dead mother-in-law's things into the dirt, and he had used her unfinished gift as an ashtray. I looked at the cigarette butt, then at the scarf, and then at the cracked jewelry box. Something inside me broke. It was not a loud break. It was not a scream or a sob. It was a silent structural failure, like a steel beam finally snapping under too much weight. For the last year, even after the stroke, even after the insults I had held onto a tiny thread of hope, I told myself Tiffany was just lost. I told myself she was influenced by bad company. I told myself she was still my little girl who used to cry when she scraped her knee. But staring at that burn mark, I realized the truth. That little girl was dead. She had died the moment she decided that her inheritance was more important than my dignity. She had died the moment she let a stranger treat her mother's memory like garbage. The grief that had weighed on me for 3 years suddenly evaporated. In its place, a cold, hard clarity settled in my chest. It was a feeling I had not felt since my days in the boardroom, negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts. It was the absence of emotion. It was the presence of pure calculation. I carefully folded the wet, muddy scarf. I did not wipe the mud off. I did not brush the ash away. I wanted to remember this exactly as it was. I placed it inside the pocket of my blazer, right next to my heart. I stood up. The pain in my back was gone. The tremor in my hands had ceased. I felt tall. I walked back around into the front of the house. Tiffany and Greg were still there, laughing about something, probably how easy it had been to get rid of the old man. When they saw me coming, Greg stiffened, raising his chin aggressively. "Back for more, Grandpa," he sneered. I did not look at him. He was no longer a person to me. He was a liability, a variable in an equation I was about to solve. I looked at Tiffany. She was refilling her glass. She glanced at me, and for a second, she faltered. Maybe she saw the change in my eyes. Maybe she noticed that I was no longer looking at her with a father's disappointment, but with a stranger's indifference. "Found your trash?" she asked, her voice slightly higher than before. I did not answer. I did not plead. I did not yell. I simply walked past them. I walked with the steady rhythm of a man who has work to do. "Hey, I am talking to you," Greg shouted. I kept walking towards my truck. My silence was louder than any scream. It unnerved them. I could feel their confusion radiating off them as I opened the door of my F-150. "You better not come back tomorrow," Tiffany yelled after me, trying to regain control of the situation. Victor hates surprises. I climbed into the driver's seat and closed the door. The sound was solid and final. I started the engine. As I reversed out of the driveway, I looked at them one last time through the rearview mirror. They looked small. Tiny figures standing in front of a giant glass house that they thought they conquered. They had no idea. I was not leaving because I was defeated. I was leaving because the battlefield had changed. They wanted a war over money. I would give them a war over law. They wanted to play dirty. I would show them that when an architect brings down a house, he does not use a sledgehammer. He pulls the keystone and watches the whole structure collapse by its own weight. I touched the scarf in my pocket. "Rest in peace, my love," I whispered to the empty cab, "and forgive me for what I am about to do to our daughter. She has chosen her path. Now I must show her where it leads." I shifted the truck into drive and headed towards the law offices of Caldwell and Associates. The sun was setting, but for me the night was just beginning. The neon sign of the Seaview Motel flickered with a dying electric hum, casting a rhythmic red glow across the stained beige carpet of room 12. It was the kind of place people went to hide or to forget. I was doing neither. I was planning. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, the synthetic bedspread rough against my palms. The room smelled of bleach and stale cigarette smoke, a sharp contrast to the salty lavender scent that used to fill my home. The glass horizon was only 2 miles down the road, but sitting here in this dimly lit box, it felt like I was on a different planet. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen was the only source of steady light in the room. My thumb hovered over the icon for my bank application. I knew it would be bad. Tiffany had the power of attorney, and she had made her intentions clear. But a part of me, the foolish fatherly part, still hoped that she had left me something. Maybe enough for a hotel room, enough for food. I tapped the screen. The circle spun for a second before the numbers appeared. Checking account ending in 4059. Balance $0.43. I stared at the screen. My pension. My life savings. The rainy day fund I had built over 40 years of sweating over blueprints and navigating construction sites. It was all gone. I scrolled down to the transaction history. A single outgoing wire transfer time stamped 3 hours ago. Recipient T&G Crypto Ventures, LLC. They had not just evicted me. They had stripped me naked. They had robbed me of my autonomy, my security, and my dignity. They expected me to wake up tomorrow destitute and broken, forcing me to crawl to the state for help, or perhaps to beg them for an allowance. It was a move of calculated cruelty. Greg had likely suggested it, but Tiffany had pressed the button. She had looked at the sum of her father's life work and decided it was better spent on a digital gambling scheme. I turned off the phone and placed it on the nightstand. I did not scream. I did not throw the lamp against the wall. The rage that had burned hot in the afternoon had cooled into something solid and heavy like a stone in my chest. I walked to the window and peeled back the dusty curtain. I could see the road that led back to my house, back to where they were probably sleeping in my bed, drinking my wine, dreaming of their millions. I checked my watch. It was 11:45 at night. It was late, but I knew Arthur Caldwell would be awake. Arthur was my lawyer. But more than that, he was the only man who knew the full extent of the legal fortress we had built around my life after Lydia died. He was a man who hated sleep almost as much as he hated injustice. I picked up the landline receiver, the plastic greasy against my ear, and dialed his private number. It rang twice. Harrison Arthur's voice was gruff, thick with the gravel of a lifelong cigar smoker. "It is midnight. You better be in jail or in the hospital." "I am in a motel, Arthur," I said, my voice steady. "The Seaview." There was a pause. The line crackled. "Why the hell are you at the Seaview? You have a $12 million house." "Not anymore," I said. "Tiffany kicked me out. She has the power of attorney, Arthur. The one I signed when I had the stroke. She thinks she sold the house. She thinks she sold everything." I heard the sound of a chair creaking as Arthur sat up. He was listening now. The lawyer in him was waking up. "She thinks she sold it," he repeated slowly, testing the words. "Explain." I told him everything. The sign on the lawn. The buyer named Victor. The $5 million cash deal. The cleared bank account. The way she threw the power of attorney in my face like a weapon. I told him about the scarf and the cigarette burn. I left nothing out. When I finished, the silence on the other end of the line was heavy. "So, she is closing the deal tomorrow morning?" I asked. 9 a.m. "Yes," Arthur said. "But Harrison listened to me very carefully. The power of attorney allows her to act on your behalf regarding your assets. It allows her to access your personal bank accounts, which she clearly has done. It allows her to sign contracts in your name." "I know," I said, closing my eyes. "That is why I am calling. I need to know if I can stop her." Harrison Arthur's voice dropped an octave. "You are forgetting what we did 3 years ago, after Lydia passed. You were afraid that exactly something like this might happen. You were afraid grief would make you vulnerable, or that someone might try to take advantage of you." My eyes snapped open. The memory hit me. The stack of papers on his mahogany desk. The notary stamp. The long conversation about protecting the estate for the future. "The trust," I whispered. "Exactly," Arthur said. "The Lydia Foundation Irrevocable Trust. We transferred the deed of the glass horizon into the trust. You are the trustee, Harrison. You have the right to live there for the rest of your life. But you do not own the house. The trust owns the house. And the beneficiary of the trust is not Tiffany. It is the architectural scholarship fund we set up in Lydia's name." I stood up, the phone cord stretching tight. That means the power of attorney is useless for the house," Arthur said, his voice sharpening. "She can sell your car. She can empty your personal checking account. But she cannot sell property that does not belong to you. The house is not an asset of Harrison Blake. It is an asset of the trust, and she has no authority over the trust." A cold smile touched my lips in the darkness. "So the sale is void." "It is more than void," Harrison Arthur said, and this time there was a warning in his tone. "If she goes into that meeting tomorrow and signs a deed claiming to be the owner or the authorized agent of the owner, she is committing fraud. If she accepts money for a property she has no legal right to sell, that is grand larceny. And since the amount is $5 million, we are talking about a first-degree felony. She is not just breaking a contract. She is walking into a prison cell." I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the window. I watched the headlights of a passing car illuminate the fog. "She knows none of this," I said. "She thinks the house is still in my name. Because you never told her, Arthur said. And I never told her. The public records take time to update, and if she used a shady title company connected to this Victor guy, they might not have done a deep title search. They are rushing. Greed makes people blind. Harrison Arthur continued, his voice softening slightly. If you want to stop this, I can call the title company right now. I can threaten them with a lawsuit and shut it down before she signs a single paper. We can save her from committing a crime. She will still be a terrible daughter, but she will not be a felon. Or, he let the word hang in the air. Or what I asked. Or we let her do it, Arthur said. We let her sign. We let her take the money. We let her complete the crime. And then we drop the hammer. But once she signs that paper, Harrison, there is no going back. She will be arrested. She will go to jail. She is your daughter. I need to know what you want to do. I looked down at my chest where the muddy scarf was tucked safely in my pocket. I thought about the way she looked at me when I fell. I thought about the cigarette butt burned into the wool that my dying wife had held. I thought about the zero balance in my bank account. She did not hesitate to destroy me, Arthur, I said quietly. She did not hesitate to leave me homeless. She made her choice. She chose money over blood. I took a deep breath, inhaling the stale air of the motel room. Do not call the title company, I said. Are you sure? Arthur asked. I am sure. I want you to bring the trust documents. Bring the original deed. Bring the police. Meet me at the house at 9 a.m. I understand, Arthur said. I will prepare the files. Try to get some sleep, Harrison. You are going to need your strength tomorrow. I hung up the phone. I sat back down on the bed. Sleep was impossible. I lay back with my hands behind my head, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. I was not just an old man anymore. I was a trap waiting to be sprung. They thought they were selling a house. They had no idea they were buying a one-way ticket to ruin. I closed my eyes and visualized the morning. I visualized the look on Tiffany's face. And for the first time all day, I felt a sense of peace. Justice was coming. And it was going to be biblical. The sun had barely breached the horizon, casting a pale gray light over the coastline, but I was already awake. In truth, I had not slept. I sat in the cab of my truck, parked a quarter-mile down the coast road, concealed behind a thicket of wild palms and sea grapes. From here, I had a clear line of sight to the driveway of the glass horizon. The binoculars I held were heavy old military surplus from my father, but the lenses were pristine. I adjusted the focus until the front gate of my home filled my vision. The sign that said "Sold" was still there, a mocking reminder of the betrayal that had taken place yesterday. But today was not about looking back. It was about watching the trap snap shut. At exactly 8:45, the silence of the morning was broken. It was not the rumble of a moving truck coming to collect furniture. It was the deep throat purr of a 12-cylinder engine. A vehicle turned off the main highway and approached the gate. It was a matte black Rolls-Royce Cullinan, the kind of car that costs more than most people earn in a lifetime. It looked like a hearse designed for a billionaire, massive and imposing, with windows tinted so dark they looked like voids. My stomach tightened. This was not a normal buyer. Families looking for a vacation home do not show up in armored luxury tanks at the crack of dawn. The car stopped at the keypad. I watched through the lenses as the window rolled down just an inch. A hand extended and punched in the code. 1014. They had given him the code. They had invited the wolf right to the door. The heavy bronze gates swung open, and the black beast rolled up the driveway, coming to a halt right next to where Greg had been hitting golf balls yesterday. For a moment, nothing happened. The engine cut out. The silence returned. Then the front doors opened. 2 men stepped out. They were identical in the way that dangerous men often are. Thick necks, ill-fitting suits that bulged around the waistbands, and eyes that scanned the perimeter with the restless paranoia of professionals. They were not real estate agents. They were muscle. They checked the bushes. They checked the corners of the house, and then one of them tapped on the rear window. The back door opened. A man stepped out into the morning mist. He was a giant. He wore a cream-colored linen suit that probably cost $10,000, but it did little to hide the violence in his frame. His head was shaved clean, shining in the dull light, and a thick purple scar ran from his left ear down to his collar, disappearing beneath his silk shirt. He took a deep breath of the sea air and then spat on my driveway. I lowered the binoculars, my hands trembling slightly. I knew that face. I had not seen it in 15 years, not since I was the lead architect on a high-rise project in Miami that got shut down by the FBI. Viktor Volkov. In the construction world, people whispered his name. They called him the Vulture. On paper, he was a private equity investor specializing in distressed assets. In reality, he was the washing machine for the Majestic Cartel and half the organized crime syndicates on the East Coast. He bought properties for cash, usually from people who were desperate or compromised, and he turned dirty money into clean real estate. He did not negotiate. He did not do inspections. He paid cash and he took ownership. Suddenly, the picture that had been blurry in my mind snapped into high-definition focus. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with a terrifying logic. The low price of $5 million. The rush to close the deal in 24 hours. The desperation in Greg's voice when he talked about needing cash now. The lie about investing in cryptocurrency. Greg was not an aspiring investor. Greg was a degenerate gambler. He had not found a buyer for the house, he had found a loan shark. He must have borrowed money from Volkov's people, probably to fund his crypto addiction, and he had lost it all. Now the debt was due. And in Volkov's world, when you cannot pay with cash, you pay with blood. Tiffany had said they were selling the house to invest. That was the lie she told herself. The truth was far uglier. They were selling the house to save Greg's life. They were handing over my legacy. My wife's memory and $12 million in equity just to stop this monster from breaking Greg's legs or worse. I watched Greg come out of the front door. Through the binoculars, he looked small and pathetic. He was bowing, scraping, smiling a nervous, frantic smile that looked more like a grimace. He extended a hand to Victor. Victor did not shake it. He just looked at Greg with dead, shark eyes and pointed to the house. Get inside, the gesture seemed to say. Let us finish this. Tiffany came out next. She was wearing a white dress, trying to look professional, trying to play the part of the heiress. She smiled at Victor, but I could see the fear in her posture. She hugged her arms around herself. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She thought this was a business transaction. She did not realize she was inviting a tiger into her living room. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. The stakes had just changed completely. This was no longer just about fraud or theft. If I drove down there right now and blocked the driveway, if I jumped out, waving my arms and shouting that the deed was fake, Volkov would not sue me. He would not call his lawyers. He would nod to the two men in the cheap suits. They would put me in the trunk of that Rolls-Royce, and I would never be seen again. And once they realized Tiffany and Greg had tried to sell them a property they did not own, the kids would likely end up in the same hole. I was watching a hostage situation where the hostages did not even know the gun was already pressed to their heads. I reached for my phone, my thumb hovering over the call button for the police chief. My instinct as a father was to scream, to rush in to save her. But my logic as a man who had survived 70 years on this earth told me to stop. If the police arrived now, it was just a civil dispute. Volkov would claim he was a legitimate buyer. He would walk away. Greg would still owe the debt. The danger would not pass, it would just be delayed. And tonight, Volkov would come back when the police were gone. No. I needed to let the trap snap shut. I needed Volkov to hand over the money. I needed Tiffany to sign the paper. I needed the crime to be committed. Only then would the police have the power to arrest everyone. Only then would Volkov be detained for illegal transaction and money laundering. Only then would Tiffany be safe in a jail cell, far away from the vulture's claws. It was a cruel calculus. To save my daughter, I had to let her become a criminal. To save her life, I had to ruin her future. I watched them disappear into the house, the heavy glass door sliding shut behind them. The house I built for love was now a stage for a crime. I put the truck in gear, but I kept my foot on the brake. I checked the time. 8:55. Arthur Caldwell would be approaching from the South Road. Police Chief Miller was waiting for my signal. "I am sorry, Tiffany," I whispered to the empty cab. "This is going to hurt you more than it hurts me. But one day, if you grow up, you might thank me for saving you from the shark." I released the brake and let the truck roll forward, inching slowly down the coastal road towards the house. I was not going to be the victim today. I was the architect, and I was about to pull the keystone out of their house of cards and watch it all come crashing down. The law was my shield, and today that I would use it as a sword. I parked the truck halfway up the driveway and sat there for a moment, staring at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. The man looking back at me was angry. His jaw was set tight, and his eyes were burning with a fire that had not been extinguished since the morning. That man had to disappear. If I walked in there as the architect seeking justice, they would call the police and have me removed before the trap could spring. Number. To catch a predator, you must sometimes play the prey. I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders slump forward. I relaxed the muscles in my face, letting the lines of age deepen. I practiced a tremor in my right hand. I needed to be the Harrison Blake they expected, the stroke victim, the confused pensioner, the burden. It was the hardest role I ever had to play because it required me to murder my own pride. I stepped out of the truck and shuffled towards the front door. I did not ring the bell. I knocked softly, a hesitant rhythmic tapping on the glass that sounded like a bird flying into a window. It took a long time for the door to open. When it did, Tiffany stood there. She was still wearing the white dress, but her makeup was fresh, and she looked more composed than she had an hour ago. Behind her, I could see Greg pacing in the living room, holding a tumbler of scotch. "Dad," she said, her voice flat. "I thought you left. Victor will be back tomorrow morning. You cannot be here." I looked down at my shoes, scuffing the toe against the welcome mat. "I know," I said, my voice trembling just enough to be convincing. I drove down to the highway, Tiffany. I sat there for an hour. I tried to call the nursing home you mentioned, but I could not remember the number. I felt dizzy. Tiffany softened slightly. It was not kindness. It was pity mixed with the relief that she was right about me being helpless. "I am sorry," I shouted earlier. I continued looking up at her with watery eyes. "You are right. I am old. I do not understand this new world. I do not understand crypto or finance. I just want to be safe. If selling the house is the only way, then I trust you." Greg appeared behind her, swirling his drink. "Well, look who decided to join reality," he sneered. "Finally realized you have nowhere else to go, huh, old man?" I nodded, swallowing the bile that rose in my throat. "I just want to ask for one thing," I said, addressing Tiffany and ignoring him. "Please, just one last dinner. One last. Let me stay tonight. Let me say goodbye to the house properly. Tomorrow I will sign whatever you want me to sign, and I will go to the home. Just give me tonight." Tiffany looked at Greg. He shrugged, taking a sip of his scotch. "Whatever. As long as he does not cause a scene. We have to celebrate the deal anyway. He can stay in the guest room, but he is out by 8 a.m. sharp." "Thank you," I whispered, stepping across the threshold. The house felt different now. It felt violated. But I kept my head down and walked to the kitchen. The counter was covered in expensive groceries, steaks, lobster tails, and bottles of champagne. They were already celebrating spending the money they had not yet stolen. Greg followed me into the kitchen. He leaned against the marble island, watching me with a predator's grin. "You know, Pop," he said, using a nickname he knew I hated. "Since you are staying, you might as well make yourself useful. Tiffany and I are exhausted from all the negotiating. Why do you not earn your keep?" He pointed to the sliding glass doors that led to the patio. "The big gas grill is out there. Fire it up. I like my ribeye medium rare. Don't burn it like you burned your bridges." For a second, the mask almost slipped. My hand twitched towards the heavy steak knife lying on the cutting board. To be treated like a servant in the house I designed was a humiliation that burned hotter than any fire. But I remembered Victor. I remembered the scar on his neck. I remembered that tomorrow Greg would be facing a judge or a hitman, and suddenly the anger turned into a cold, dark amusement. "Sure, Greg," I said, my voice meek. "I can do that. I used to be pretty good at grilling." I took the platter of raw meat and walked out onto the patio. The sun had set, and the ocean was a black void beyond the pool. I lit the grill, watching the blue flames dance. The heat hit my face, but I felt cold inside. I placed the steaks on the grate, the sound of sizzling fat filling the silence. Through the glass walls, I could see them inside. Tiffany was laughing at something on her phone. Greg was pouring more champagne. They looked like royalty in a castle they had conquered. I stood there, flipping the meat, serving my enemies, knowing that this was the last meal of the condemned. After a few minutes, the sliding door opened. I expected Tiffany coming to check on me, but it was Greg. He did not come over to the grill. He walked to the edge of the patio, lighting a cigarette. He turned his back to me, assuming I was just a deaf old cook focused on his task. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a number. I turned the burner down to low, reducing the noise of the sizzle. I took a step closer, moving silently in my loafers. "Yeah, it is done," Greg said into the phone, his voice low and urgent. I strained my ears. The wind carried his voice away, but then shifted, bringing it back clear and sharp. "Relax." "I told you," Greg hissed. "The old man is here. He is completely out of it. He thinks we are doing him a favor." "Yeah, the buyer is Viktor Volkov. I know who he is, okay? That is why I need the transfer to happen fast." He took a long drag of the cigarette, the cherry glowing red in the darkness. "Listen, as soon as I get the cash tomorrow, I am heading to the airport. I bought a one-way ticket to Costa Rica. No, Tiffany is staying. She is the fall guy if anything goes wrong. The power of attorney is in her name, not mine. If the old man wakes up or if the feds get involved, she takes the heat. I am just the boyfriend." My grip tightened on the metal tongs. The metal bit into my palm. He was not just stealing my money. He was planning to abandon my daughter. He was going to leave her to face the police or worse, Victor, while he vanished with the cash. "I am not stupid," Greg laughed softly. "I have been planning this for months. Just have the crypto wallet ready. Once I convert the cash, I am gone." He hung up the phone and flicked the cigarette butt into my swimming pool, the same pool where his ashes were already floating. He turned around and saw me standing by the grill. For a second he looked startled, but then he saw the apron I was wearing and the plate of cooked food in my hand. "Is it ready yet?" he snapped. "I am starving." I looked at him. I looked at the man who planned to destroy my family and leave my daughter to rot in prison. "It is ready." "Greg," I said, my voice steady and devoid of the tremor I had faked earlier. "It is done to perfection." I plated the steaks. I walked back inside and set the table. I sat down with them and ate in silence. I watched them drink. I watched them celebrate. I listened to Greg toast to family and future. And every time he smiled, I thought about the recording on his phone and the conversation I had just overheard. He thought he was the player. He did not know he was already in checkmate. "Finish your steak, Greg," I thought, as I chewed my own food slowly. "Enjoy the wine. Because where you are going, the menu is very different, and there are no flights to Costa Rica." The dinner ended. I cleared the plates like a good servant. I washed the dishes while they went upstairs to the master bedroom, my bedroom, to sleep. I went to the guest room on the first floor. I did not sleep. I lay on the bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling fan. I checked my watch. 9 hours until sunrise. 9 hours until the curtain rose on the final act. I closed my eyes and visualized the morning. I visualized the look on Greg's face when the handcuffs clicked. It was the only thing that gave me peace. The waiting was over. The acting was done. Tomorrow, the architect would bring the house down. The dining room was illuminated by the soft glow of the crystal chandelier, a fixture I had imported from Austria 20 years ago. The light fractured through the crystals, casting dancing rainbows across the table, but there was no color in my world tonight. There was only the metallic taste of betrayal. I sat at the end of the long mahogany table, the spot where I used to preside over Thanksgiving dinners and birthday parties. Now I sat there like a ghost, invited to his own wake. To my right sat Greg, wolfing down the ribeye steak I had grilled with the manners of a starving dog. To my left sat Tiffany, my daughter, picking at her lobster tail with a detached elegance that made my stomach turn. So Dad Tiffany started wiping the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin. We need to talk about logistics. Since the closing is at 9 tomorrow morning, we have arranged for your transport at 10. Transport. I repeated the word, feeling heavy on my tongue. You make it sound like I am a package being shipped to a warehouse. Tiffany sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. Do not be difficult. It is a service, a private car. They will take you to Shady Oaks. It is the facility Greg and I found for you. It is wonderful, Dad, really. 5 stars. They have a garden and a recreation room with a big television, and I think they even have a bridge club. You used to like cards, right? I looked at her. I knew Shady Oaks. I had designed an extension for a hospital nearby, and I knew every care facility in the county. Shady Oaks was not 5 stars. It was a state-funded holding pen for the indigent and the forgotten. It was a place where the hallways smelled of urine and industrial cleaner, where the staff was overworked and underpaid, and where the elderly sat in wheelchairs facing walls waiting for the end. She was sending me to a graveyard so she could live in a palace. It sounds expensive, I said, keeping my voice low and trembling slightly, playing the part of the worried pensioner. Can we afford it? If you sell the house, surely there are better places. Greg laughed, slamming his wine glass down a little too hard. Expense is not the issue, Pop. We are getting you the best care money can buy. Well, the best care reasonable money can buy. We have to be smart with the capital from the house. We cannot blow it all on rent for a luxury suite. You do not need luxury. You need safety. Safety, I thought. You mean you need the money for your crypto gambling and your debts to Russian mobsters. Tiffany reached into her purse and pulled out a glossy brochure. She slid it across the polished wood. Look at the pictures, Dad. Look how happy everyone is. I glanced at the stock photo of a smiling elderly couple. It was a lie printed on cheap paper. I did not touch it. I slowly moved my hand to my chest pocket. I felt the outline of my smartphone. I had set the shortcut button to start recording earlier. All I had to do was press the volume key through the fabric of my blazer. I pressed it. A tiny vibration against my chest confirmed it was running. Tiffany, I said, and I let my voice crack with genuine emotion. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Just this once. She looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. What is it now? I looked around the room. I looked at the height marks penciled on the doorframe of the kitchen, recording her growth from a toddler to a teenager. I looked at the empty spot on the wall where Lydia's portrait used to hang. This house, I said softly. It is not just wood and glass. It is your mother. Every room has her memory. The garden has her roses. If you sell this place to strangers, especially to a man like Victor, you know they are going to tear it down. They are going to erase everything she ever touched. I leaned forward, staring directly into her eyes. Are you sure you want to do this, Tiffany? Are you absolutely sure? Is the money worth erasing your mother's legacy? Do you not feel any regret? The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the distant crash of the ocean. Greg stopped chewing his fork, hovering halfway to his mouth. He looked at Tiffany, waiting to see if she would crack. Tiffany stared at me. For a second, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Was it guilt? Was it shame? Was it the memory of the woman who had brushed her hair and sung her to sleep? Then she blinked, and the flicker was gone. Her face hardened into a mask of cold indifference. Dad, she said, her voice steady and sharp like a scalpel. You have to stop living in the past. It is pathetic. She took a sip of wine and set the glass down. Mom is dead, she said. The words hung in the air, brutal and final. She is dead, Dad, she continued. She is not in the walls. She is not in the garden. She is in the ground. Keeping this big empty house is not honoring her. It is just stupid. It is a waste of equity. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Money is real, she said. Money can buy a future. Mom is the past, and I am tired of living in a museum. So no, I do not have regrets. I have plans, and tomorrow those plans start. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was the chill of absolute confirmation. I had hoped against hope that she was being manipulated, that she was reluctant. But she was not. She was willing. She had just confessed to prioritizing her greed over her mother's memory, and she had done it while I was recording. I sat back in my chair. The vibration in my pocket seemed to pulse like a second heartbeat. I had it. The jury would hear that tone. The judge would hear that coldness. Okay, I whispered. Okay, Tiffany. I just wanted to know. Greg let out a loud belch, shattering the tension. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, ignoring the napkin. Great talk, family meeting adjourned, he said, clapping his hands together. Now hurry up and finish your food, old man. We need this kitchen clean before we go to bed. Victor and his lawyers are coming early, like 7 a.m. early for a final walkthrough before the notary arrives at 9. He stood up, swaying slightly from the alcohol. And do not get any bright ideas about stalling, he added, pointing a finger at me. You be ready. Bags packed, waiting by the door. If you mess this up for me, if you say one weird thing to Victor, I swear I will put you in a home that makes Shady Oaks look like the Ritz. I looked at the steak on my plate. It had gone cold. The fat had congealed. It looked unappetizing, like the situation I was in. I understand, Greg, I said quietly. I will be ready. Tiffany stood up, smoothing down her dress. She did not say goodnight. She did not check if I was okay. She just grabbed the bottle of wine and headed for the stairs. Come on, Greg, she called out. We have to celebrate. Tomorrow we are rich. Greg followed her, grinning like a wolf who had just raided the henhouse. He slapped me on the shoulder as he passed, not in a friendly way, but with a heavy, condescending force. Don't stay up too late, Pop. Big day tomorrow. I listened to their footsteps fading up the stairs. I listened to the bedroom door slam shut. I listened to the muffled sound of their laughter. I was alone in the dining room. I reached into my pocket and stopped the recording. I saved the file. I named it The Truth. I uploaded it to the cloud immediately, ensuring that even if they broke my phone, the evidence would survive. I stood up and began to clear the table. I scraped the leftovers into the bin. I loaded the dishwasher. I wiped down the counters until they gleamed. I did it methodically, calmly. I was their servant tonight. I was the old man cleaning up their mess. But as I looked at my reflection in the dark window of the kitchen, I did not see a servant. I saw a man who had just secured the final nail in the coffin. They thought the dinner was a celebration of their victory. They did not realize it was the last supper before their execution. "Victor is coming early," Greg had said. Good, I thought, as I turned off the lights, plunging the house into darkness. Let him come. The earlier he comes, the sooner this nightmare ends. I walked to the guest room, my steps silent on the hardwood floor. I had one more phone call to make to Arthur. I needed to tell him the timeline had changed. I needed everything ready for the morning. "Sleep well, my daughter," I whispered into the shadows. "Dream of your millions. Because when you wake up, you will find that the only thing you own is the consequences of your actions." The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 9 times. Each chime felt heavy and final, echoing through the cavernous living room like a countdown to an execution. I sat in the wingback chair in the far corner of the room, my hands resting on the head of a cane I did not actually need. I had found it in the umbrella stand earlier and decided it was the perfect prop for my performance. From my vantage point, I could see the entire stage. The living room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific Ocean, was bathed in morning light, but the atmosphere inside was suffocatingly dark. The front door opened. There was no knock. Viktor Volkov did not knock on doors he owned or thought he owned. He walked in first, bringing with him a gust of cold air and the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something metallic. He was followed by his lawyer, a thin man with a sharp nose and rimless glasses, who carried a leather portfolio like a weapon. Behind them came the 2 bodyguards from yesterday, their eyes scanning the room for threats, before settling on me with dismissive disinterest. Tiffany stood in the center of the room. She had spent an hour on her hair and makeup trying to look like the sophisticated mistress of the estate, but I could see the cracks in the porcelain. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her knuckles white. She offered a nervous smile that did not reach her eyes. Greg stood beside her, shifting his weight from foot to foot, unable to stand still. He looked like a man standing on a trapdoor, waiting for the lever to be pulled. "Mr. Volkov," Tiffany said, her voice pitching slightly higher than normal. "Welcome. Everything is ready. We have the notary here." She gestured to the dining table where a sweating, balding man named Mr. Henderson sat arranging his stamps and seals. I knew Henderson. He was a low-rent notary who operated out of a strip mall near the airport. He was the kind of man who did not ask questions as long as the cash was placed in his envelope. He refused to look at me. He kept his head down, shuffling papers, his hands trembling just enough to be noticeable. Victor did not return the greeting. He simply nodded to his bodyguards. One of them stepped forward carrying a large aluminum briefcase. He placed it on the glass coffee table with a heavy thud. The sound made Greg jump. "Open it!" Victor commanded, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. The bodyguard flipped the latches. Click. Click. The sound was incredibly loud in the silent room. He lifted the lid. For a moment, nobody breathed. Inside the case, stacked in neat, tight rows, were bundles of $100 bills. $5 million in cash. It is a sight that changes people. I saw the transformation happen in real time. Tiffany gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes widened, and the fear that had been there a moment ago was instantly replaced by a ravenous hunger. She was not looking at paper. She was looking at designer clothes. She was looking at first-class tickets. She was looking at a life she thought she deserved. Greg let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He reached out, as if to touch the money, but the bodyguard slapped his hand away. "Not yet," the lawyer said, stepping forward. "We sign first. Then you get the combination." Greg pulled his hand back, rubbing his wrist. "Right. Of course, let us sign. Let us get this over with." They moved to the dining table. The lawyer spread out the documents. There were stacks of them. The deed of trust, the bill of sale, the transfer of title. It was a mountain of legal paperwork designed to give the illusion of legitimacy to a transaction that was criminal at its core. I watched from my corner. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching a movie. That was my house they were selling. That was my life on those pages. But the anger was gone, replaced by a cold, clinical observation. I was looking for the point of no return. The lawyer handed a pen to Tiffany, a heavy black fountain pen. "Sign here," he said, pointing to the line above my typed name. "And here, and initial here. You are signing as attorney in fact for Harrison Blake under the durable power of attorney dated last August. Correct?" "Yes," Tiffany said, her voice steady, now bolstered by the sight of the cash. "I have the authority. My father is unable to manage his affairs." She bent over the table. The tip of the pen touched the paper. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound of her signature was the sound of the trap arming itself. With every page she signed, she was digging herself deeper into a hole she could not climb out of. She was committing fraud. She was committing forgery. She was committing grand larceny. And she was doing it with a smile. Greg hovered over her shoulder, his eyes darting between the pen and the briefcase. "Faster, babe," he whispered. "Just sign it." Victor stood by the window, his back to the ocean. He was not looking at the papers. He was looking at me. I held his gaze. I did not blink. I did not look away. I let my mouth hang open slightly and let my head loll to one side, maintaining the charade of the senile old man, but my eyes remained locked on his. He narrowed his eyes. He was a predator, and predators have an instinct for danger. He sensed something was wrong. He sensed that the old man in the corner was too quiet, too calm. He walked over to me, his footsteps silent on the rug. He towered over me, blocking out the light. "You," he said. I looked up at him, blinking slowly. "Me," I rasped. "You are the father," Victor said. "The owner." I said, my voice weak. "Now, I am just a guest." Victor leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could see the pores in his skin, the cruelty in the set of his jaw. "Do you know what is happening here?" he asked. "Do you know your daughter is selling your house for cash? Do you understand that once she signs those papers, you have nothing? You are on the street." He was testing me. He wanted to see if I would fight. He wanted to see if there was any spark of resistance left in the old man. I gripped my cane tighter. I wanted to smash it into his knee. I wanted to stand up and tell him that I was going to bury him under the weight of the law. But I could not. Not yet. The ink was not dry. I looked past him at Tiffany. She had stopped writing. She was looking at us, terror returning to her face. I trust my daughter," I stammered, forcing a tear to pool in the corner of my eye. "She says it is for the best. She says the money will take care of me." Victor stared at me for a long moment, searching for the lie. Then he straightened up. He looked at Tiffany. "He seems lucid enough," he said, his voice suspicious. "He knows what is happening. Why is he not signing himself? Why do you need the power of attorney?" Panic flared in the room. Greg stepped forward, sweat dripping down his forehead. "He has good days and bad days," Greg said quickly, too quickly. "Today is a good day. But usually he forgets who he is. He gets confused. The doctors said he cannot handle financial decisions. That is why we have the paperwork. It is all legal. Ask your lawyer." Victor looked at his lawyer. The lawyer nodded, scrolling through the documents. "The power of attorney looks standard, Mr. Volkov. It grants full authority. As long as the notary witnesses it, the title transfer is valid." Victor did not look convinced. He looked back at me. "Old man," he said, "do you have anything to say?" Any objections? Speak now or get out of my house. This was it. The moment of truth. I could stop it. I could say the word trust. I could mention Arthur Caldwell. The deal would collapse. Tiffany would be saved from prison. But she would learn nothing. She would hate me for ruining her payday. And tomorrow she would find another way to hurt me. I opened my mouth to speak. I took a breath. But before I could get a word out, Tiffany slammed her hand on the table. "Oh, stop it!" she snapped. She walked over to us, placing herself between me and Victor. "Do not listen to him," she said, her voice shrill. "He is senile. He is confused. He thinks he is still a famous architect, but half the time he thinks Mom is still alive. He is just mumbling. Don't pay attention to him." She turned to me, her eyes blazing with a mixture of desperation and greed. "Be quiet, Dad," she hissed. "Just sit there and be quiet. You promised." She turned back to Victor, flashing a brilliant fake smile. "He is fine. He is just tired. Let us finish this. I want to see the money." Victor looked at her. He looked at the greed radiating off her like heat. He recognized that greed. He respected it. It was the only language he truly understood. "Fine," he said, turning his back on me. "Finish signing." Tiffany rushed back to the table. She grabbed the pen. She signed the last document with a flourish. "Done," she breathless. "It is done." The notary stamped the document. Thud. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. It was finished. The crime was complete. The house was sold. The fraud was executed. Victor nodded to his bodyguard. "Give them the combination." The bodyguard stepped forward and spun the dial on the briefcase. He clicked it open again. "It is all yours," Victor said, "and the house is mine." Greg let out a whoop of joy. He plunged his hands into the cash, grabbing bundles of bills, laughing like a maniac. Tiffany hugged him, burying her face in his shoulder, sobbing with relief. I sat in my corner, and slowly, very slowly, I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my phone. I did not look at the screen. I knew exactly where the button was. I pressed send on the text message I had drafted an hour ago. It was sent to two people, Arthur Caldwell and Police Chief Miller. The message was simple. One word. Now. I put the phone back in my pocket. I gripped my cane. And for the first time that morning, I allowed myself to smile. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of the architect who has just watched the demolition charges detonate. I stood up. My legs were strong. My back was straight. The act was over. "Excuse me," I said. My voice was not the weak rasp of an old man. It was the booming baritone that had commanded construction sites for 40 years. It cut through the celebration like a knife. Everyone froze. Greg dropped a bundle of cash. Tiffany turned around, her eyes wide. Victor slowly turned to face me, his hand drifting towards his jacket pocket. I walked to the center of the room. I did not limp. I believe I said, looking at the pile of documents, that there is one signature missing. Tiffany laughed nervously. "What are you talking about, Dad?" "Sit down." "No, Tiffany," I said. "I will not sit down, and I will not be quiet." I pointed to the briefcase. "I hope you enjoy holding that money," I said, "because it is the most expensive money you will ever touch. It just cost you your freedom." A siren wailed in the distance, then another, and another. The sound grew louder, rapidly approaching the gate. Victor's head snapped towards the window. "What did you do?" The Russian whispered, his face turning purple. I checked my watch. 9:15. Right on time. "I did not do anything," I said calmly. "I just invited the real owners of this house to the party. And the police." The front gate crashed open. The game was up. The room went silent as Tiffany leaned over the mahogany table. The only sound was the scratching of the nib against the paper. Scratch, scratch, scratch. To anyone else, it was just the sound of a contract being finalized. But to me, it sounded like the grinding of a prison cell door sliding shut. I sat in my corner gripping the handle of my cane and I watched. I did not blink. I wanted to remember this moment. I needed to witness the exact second my daughter ceased to be a child I raised and became a criminal I had to stop. She was signing her name, Tiffany Blake. But below that, in the section marked capacity, she wrote the words that sealed her fate. Attorney in fact for Harrison Blake. I counted the signatures. One on the deed, one on the bill of sale, one on the affidavit of title. With every stroke of the pen, she was adding years to her sentence. I found myself holding my breath. Part of me, the father part, was screaming inside my head. Stop. Throw the pen down. Run away. Don't do this, Tiffany. If you stop now, we can fix it. I can claim it was a misunderstanding. I can pay Victor off. We can go back to being a broken family, but a free one. But she did not stop. She did not hesitate. Her hand was steady, fueled by the adrenaline of greed. She finished the last signature with a flourish, a loop on the Y that looked arrogant and sharp. She straightened up and capped the pen, placing it down on the table with a click that echoed like a gunshot. It is done, she said breathlessly, pushing the stack of papers toward the notary. Mr. Henderson, the notary, wiped sweat from his bald head. He picked up his embosser. He lined it up with the gold foil seal on the document. He squeezed the handle. The paper crunched. The seal was set. It was official. The fraud was no longer a plan. It was a documented fact recorded in ink and stamped with the authority of the state. I let out a long, slow exhale. The tension that had been coiling in my chest released. It was over. The line had been crossed. There was no going back now. The architectural structure of their crime was complete, and they were standing right in the middle of it, unaware that the foundation was made of quicksand. Victor Volkov stepped forward. He did not look at the papers. He did not care about the legalities. He cared about possession. He picked up the deed, glancing at it briefly, before handing it to his lawyer. Is it good? He asked, his voice a low rumble. The lawyer scanned the documents, adjusting his glasses. It appears to be in order, Mr. Volkov. You are now the legal owner of the property known as the Glass Horizon. Victor nodded. A cruel smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a conqueror who had just sacked a city. He turned to the bodyguard who was guarding the aluminum briefcase. Pay them, he said. The bodyguard spun the briefcase around on the glass coffee table. He pushed it across the surface. The metal scraped against the glass, a harsh, grating sound that made my teeth ache. Greg lunged for it. He did not walk, he lunged. He flipped the latches open and threw the lid back. The sight of the money, $5 million in tight stacks of $100 bills, seemed to intoxicate him. He reached in, grabbing a bundle and bringing it to his nose, inhaling the scent of the cash. We did it, babe, he shouted, his voice cracking with hysteria. We actually did it. We are rich. Tiffany laughed, a high-pitched sound that bordered on manic. She hugged him, staring at the money with eyes that were wide and glassy. She was not seeing $5 million. She was seeing freedom from her debts. She was seeing a life of luxury. She was blind to the man in the corner watching her. Victor did not share their joy. He buttoned his linen jacket and checked his watch. He had what he wanted. The transaction was concluded. Now he wanted to clean up the loose ends. You have the money, Victor said, his voice cutting through their celebration like a blade of ice. Now get out. Greg looked up, his smile faltering slightly. What? You heard me, Victor said. The house is mine. I have a crew coming in 1 hour to strip the interior. I want you and your things off the property in 10 minutes. but Tiffany stammered. We thought we could have a moment to pack. My father. Victor turned his cold, dead eyes toward me. I was still sitting in the wingback chair, slumped over my cane, playing the part of the confused old man. Take the garbage with you, Victor spat. I do not care where you go. Just get out of my sight. And take the old invalid with you. If he is still here when my crew arrives, they will toss him out with the rest of the trash. Greg snapped the briefcase shut. He did not care about the insults. He had the money. He grabbed the handle, his knuckles turning white. Come on, Tiff, Greg said, pulling her arm. Let us go, we have the cash. Who cares what he says? Let us get to the airport. Tiffany looked at me, then at the house, then at the money. She made her choice instantly. She turned her back on her home. Okay, she said. Let us go. Come on, Dad, get up. She walked towards me, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She did not look sad. She looked impatient. Dad, let us go, she said, reaching out to grab my arm. We are leaving. I looked at her hand. The hand that had just signed away my life. The hand that had betrayed her mother. I looked at Greg, who was already halfway to the door, clutching the briefcase like a lifeline. I looked at Victor, who was pouring himself a drink from my decanter, claiming my home as his own. The time for acting was over. The time for the trembling old man was finished. I did not take her hand. Instead, I planted my feet firmly on the floor. I gripped the arms of the chair. And I stood up. I did not stand up slowly like a 70-year-old stroke victim. I stood up with the power and grace of the man I used to be. The man who climbed steel girders. The man who commanded respect. I straightened my back, pushing my chest out. I grew 3 inches in height, shedding the weight of the character I had been playing. Tiffany froze. Her hand hovered in the air, confused by the sudden change in my posture. Dad, she whispered. What are you doing? I ignored her. I looked past her. I looked directly at Greg. Stop, I said. The word was not a request. It was a command. It resonated off the glass walls, deep and authoritative. It was the voice of Harrison Blake, the architect. Greg stopped. He turned around, his hand on the door handle. What did you say, old man? He sneered. I said, stop, I repeated, my voice dropping an octave. Put the case down, Greg. The room went deadly silent. Victor paused, the glass of bourbon halfway to his lips. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing, as he reassessed the threat in the room. He saw me standing there. He saw that the tremor was gone. He saw that my eyes were clear and sharp as diamonds. Tiffany stepped back, looking at me as if I were a stranger. Dad, you are okay. I looked at her, and for the first time in days, I let the mask fall completely. I let her see the disappointment and the resolve. I am better than okay, Tiffany, I said. I am lucid, and I am fully aware of what you just did. I took a step forward. My cane clicked against the floor, but now it sounded like a gavel striking a sounding block. You just signed a deed transferring a property you do not own. I said, my voice calm but terrifying. You accepted $5 million in cash for an asset that belongs to a trust. That is fraud, Tiffany. That is first-degree felony fraud. Greg laughed, a nervous, twitchy sound. You are crazy, old man. You signed the power of attorney. We have the rights. No, I said. You have a piece of paper that gives you power over Harrison Blake's assets. But Harrison Blake does not own this house. The Lydia Foundation owns this house, and I am the trustee. I reached into my breast pocket. I did not pull out a phone. I pulled out a folded document, the original deed of trust. I unfolded it and held it up. This is the real deed, I said, and your signature is not on it, which means you just sold Mr. Volkov a fantasy. Victor put his glass down. The sound of crystal hitting wood was deafening. He looked at the document in my hand. Then he looked at the briefcase in Greg's hand. His face darkened. The veins in his neck began to bulge. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Greg turned pale. He looked at Tiffany. Tiffany looked at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "No, no," Greg stammered. "He is lying. He is senile." "Victor, listen to me." I cut him off. "I am not lying, Greg, and I am not senile. I am the man who just caught you." I looked at Victor. "Mr. Volkov," I said, "I suggest you check your briefcase, because if you leave with that cash, you are an accomplice to a felony. But if you take it back, well then you are just a victim of an attempted scam." Victor moved. He moved with the speed of a striking cobra. He took 2 steps and blocked the door. His bodyguards stepped forward, closing the circle. Greg backed away, clutching the briefcase to his chest. "No. No. Stay back." Victor looked at Greg, and the look in his eyes was pure murder. "You tried to rip me off," he growled. "You tried to sell me a house you do not own." "It wasn't me," Greg screamed, pointing at Tiffany. "It was her. She said it was legal. She is the one who signed." Tiffany let out a sob. "Greg, how could you?" I stood in the center of the chaos, the eye of the storm. "Wait," I said again. Everyone looked at me. "Before you kill each other," I said, "you should know one thing. I did not come here alone." I held up my phone. The screen was glowing. "I invited the police," I said. "And they have been listening to this entire transaction." As if on cue, the sound of heavy boots hit the front porch. The door burst open. "Police. Drop the case. Now." The room exploded into motion, but I stood still. I watched the color drain from Tiffany's face. I watched the terror consume Greg. And I felt a single cold tear roll down my cheek. The trap had sprung. The house had fallen. And now the only thing left to do was sweep up the debris. The officers swarmed into the room with weapons drawn, but they did not tackle anyone. They fanned out, securing the exits, creating a perimeter of blue uniforms and cold steel. Police Chief Miller stood at the front, his service weapon held at the low ready. He looked at me and gave a barely perceptible nod. He was not there to raid a home, he was there to witness a crime scene that I had orchestrated. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Greg stood frozen, his hands hovering over the open briefcase of money, like a child caught stealing from a cookie jar. Tiffany was pressed against the wall, her face a mask of shock and confusion. Victor Volkov, however, did not look frightened. He looked annoyed. He lowered his hands slowly and looked at the police chief with the arrogance of a man who has expensive lawyers on speed dial. "This is a mistake," Victor said, his voice calm but laced with menace. "I am concluding a private business transaction. These officers are trespassing." I stepped forward, placing myself between the police and the criminals. I leaned heavily on my cane, not for support, but to ground myself in the moment. "It is not a mistake, Mr. Volkov," I said. "And the transaction is not concluded. In fact, it never legally began." Tiffany found her voice then. It was shrill, bordering on hysterical. "Dad, stop this. Tell them to leave. You are confusing everyone. I have the power of attorney. I showed it to the lawyer. I showed it to the notary. I have the right to sell this house." She reached into her purse and pulled out the crumpled copy of the document, waving it in the air like a shield. "See," she screamed at the police chief. "Look at this. It is signed by him. It gives me full control over his assets. This is my house to sell." I shook my head slowly, looking at her with a mixture of pity and resolve. "That document gives you control over Harrison Blake's assets," I said, my voice steady. "It gives you the right to empty my checking account, which you did. It gives you the right to sell my old truck, but it does not give you the right to sell this house." Why not? She shrieked. You own the house. No, I said softly. I do not. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone again. I tapped the screen and placed it on the glass coffee table right next to the briefcase of stolen money. I pressed the speakerphone button. The dial tone echoed through the silent room, a lonely electronic sound that signaled the end of their world. Who are you calling, Greg? Stammered, sweat dripping from his nose. I am calling the owner, I said. The line rang once, twice, then a click. Arthur Caldwell here. The voice was gravelly and sharp, amplified by the glass surface of the table. It sounded like the voice of judgment itself. Arthur, I said, leaning over the phone. I have Tiffany and Greg here. I also have a Mr. Victor Volkov. They have just signed a deed transferring the glass horizon to Mr. Volkov in exchange for $5 million in cash. They used my power of attorney to execute the sale. There was a pause on the other end, a pause that felt longer than the last 3 years of my life. Then Arthur Caldwell laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was a dry, dark sound. That is unfortunate, he said, because the power of attorney is irrelevant regarding that property. Tiffany took a step forward, staring at the phone. What do you mean, irrelevant? Who is this? I am Arthur Caldwell, the trustee and manager of the Lydia Foundation. Irrevocable trust, the voice boomed. Tiffany froze. The color drained from her face, leaving it a sickly shade of gray. 3 years ago, Mr. Caldwell continued, his voice becoming clinical and precise. Harrison Blake transferred the title of the property located at 142 Ocean Drive into the trust. The trust is a separate legal entity. Harrison Blake does not own the house. The trust owns the house. And as the manager of the trust, I am the only person on this earth who can authorize a sale. The room seemed to shrink. The walls of glass that Greg and Tiffany thought were their ticket to freedom were now the bars of their cage. But, Tiffany stammered, her hands shaking so hard she dropped the power of attorney papers. Dad never told me. He did not have to tell you, Caldwell said. It is a matter of public record. If you or your buyer had bothered to do a legitimate title search instead of rushing a cash deal, you would have known. Caldwell paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Since I did not sign that deed, he continued, the document you just executed is a forgery. The transfer is void, and the money sitting on that table is proceeds from a criminal fraud. Mr. Volkov, if you try to leave with that deed, you are in possession of stolen property. And Tiffany, if you try to keep that money, you are guilty of grand larceny and mortgage fraud. The phone went silent. I looked up from the device. I looked at my daughter. She was trembling, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an escape, looking for an excuse, looking for anything other than the truth. You set me up, she whispered. Her voice was broken. You knew. You let me sign it. You let me take the money. I did not let you do anything, Tiffany, I said, feeling a crack in my heart. I gave you a choice. Last night at dinner I asked you. I begged you. I asked if you were sure. I asked if the money was worth erasing your mother. You said yes. You chose this. I turned to Greg. He was backed against the wall, his face pale, his breathing shallow. He was not looking at the police. He was looking at Victor. Victor Volkov stood perfectly still. He was not looking at the phone. He was looking at the stack of papers on the table. The papers he had thought were a deed were now just evidence of his own stupidity. He had been played. He, the wolf of the construction industry, had been tricked by a pair of greedy children and trapped by an old man he had dismissed as garbage. Slowly, Victor reached out and picked up the deed. He looked at Tiffany's signature. Then he looked at me, so he said, his voice dangerously quiet. This paper is trash. It is worse than trash, I said. It is a confession. Victor crumpled the paper in his massive fist. The sound of the paper crushing was loud in the silence. His face began to change. The cool professional mask slipped away, revealing the raw violence underneath. His skin turned a deep, mottled red, then darkened to a terrifying shade of purple. The veins in his neck pulsed against his collar. He turned his head slowly like a tank turret traversing to find a target. He did not look at me. He did not look at Tiffany. He looked at Greg. Greg tried to speak, but only a squeak came out. He raised his hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Victor, please, I didn't know. She told me." "You brought me here," Victor whispered. The whisper was more frightening than a scream. "You told me it was clean. You told me it was a quick flip. You wasted my time. You exposed me to the police. And you tried to sell me air." He took a step toward Greg. Greg scrambled backward, knocking over a vase. Police Chief Miller stepped forward, his hand on his holster. "That is enough," Miller barked. "Mr. Volkov, step away from him." Victor stopped. He took a deep breath, controlling his rage, but his eyes never left Greg's face. He smiled a smile that promised pain, a smile that said, "This was not over, not by a long shot." "I am just a victim here, officer," Victor said, smoothing his jacket. "I was attempting to buy a home. I was defrauded by these two. I want to press charges." He pointed a thick finger at Greg. "I want my money back," he said. "And I want him to know that nobody steals $5 million from me. Nobody." Greg slid down the wall, collapsing into a heap on the floor. He began to sob. It was a pitiful sound. The arrogance, the swagger, the golf club swinging bravado, it was all gone. He was just a small, scared man who had gambled with the devil and lost. I reached down and pressed the button to end the call. The line went dead. I looked at the scene before me. My daughter in shock, her boyfriend in tears, the mobster in a rage, and the police waiting to slap the cuffs on. It was a tragedy, but it was a tragedy they had written themselves. I had just provided the stage. "Officer Miller," I said, my voice tired. "I believe you have everything you need. The recording of the transaction is on my phone. The false deed is in Mr. Volkov's hand. And the money." I pointed to the briefcase. "The money is right there." Miller nodded. He signaled to his men. "All right," he shouted. "Cuff them. All of them." As the officers moved in, I turned away. I walked to the window and looked out at the ocean. The waves were crashing against the shore, indifferent to the ruin of my family. I felt old. I felt tired. But for the first time in a long time, I felt clean. The house was safe. The legacy was safe. And the lesson had been delivered. The air in the room grew heavy and thick, charged with a violence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The police officers held their perimeter weapons trained on the center of the room, but for a moment they did not exist. In the mind of Viktor Volkov, there were no badges and no laws. There was only the insult. The $5 million sitting in the open briefcase was no longer just currency. It was bait. And he had taken it. The realization that he, the predator, had been played for a fool by a pair of amateur grifters was a pill too bitter to swallow. Victor did not raise his hands in surrender. He did not look at Chief Miller. He looked at Greg. His hand drifted inside his jacket, not for a weapon, but for a silk handkerchief. He dabbed his forehead, slowly wiping away a sheen of sweat that was not from fear, but from a rage so hot it was practically radioactive. He signaled to his two bodyguards with a subtle twitch of his head. It was a movement so small you would miss it if you were not looking, but the message was clear. "Break them." "You think this is funny?" Victor whispered, his voice vibrating with a deadly tremor. "You think you can bring me to this house? You think you can waste my time? You think you can steal my money and then hide behind the police?" He took a step forward, his expensive Italian shoes crunching on the glass shards of the vase Greg had knocked over. "Nobody steals from me," Victor said. "Not $5. And certainly not 5 million. Greg let out a sound that was less human and more animal. It was the squeal of a trapped rat realizing the trap has no exit. He scrambled backwards on the floor, his heels skidding on the polished wood until his back hit the legs of the dining table. He looked at the police, then at Victor, then at me. His eyes were wide and wet with terror. "It wasn't me," Greg screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Tiffany. "It was her idea. She told me the house was hers. She told me the old man was senile. I am just the boyfriend. I didn't know anything about the trust. I swear to God, Victor, I didn't know." The betrayal was immediate and absolute. There was no hesitation, no loyalty. Greg threw the woman he claimed to love directly into the fire to save his own skin. He did not look at Tiffany as he spoke. He looked only at the monster approaching him, hoping that a sacrifice would satisfy the beast. "She set it up." Greg yelled, his voice cracking. "She got the power of attorney. She hired the notary. I just wanted to help her invest. She lied to me too. She is the criminal here, not me. Look at the papers. Her signature is on them, not mine." Tiffany stood frozen near the window. Her face, which had been so smug and superior just minutes ago, was now a mask of crumbling plaster. She heard Greg's words. She heard the man she had betrayed her father for selling her out for a chance at survival. She looked at Greg with a mixture of horror and disbelief. "Greg," she whispered, "how can you say that? We did this together. You said we were a team." "Shut up," Greg shrieked, kicking his legs out as one of Victor's bodyguards stepped closer. "You dragged me into this. Tell them it was your idea." Tiffany turned to me. Her eyes were red and swollen. She looked at the police officers who were now shouting commands that nobody was listening to. She looked at the towering figure of Viktor Volkov, whose face promised nothing but pain. And finally she looked at me. Her father. The man she had called a burden. The man she had tried to erase. "Daddy." She cried out the word, sounding childish and broken. "Daddy, please. Do something. Tell them. Tell them I didn't mean to. I didn't know about the trust. You have to help me. He is going to kill us." She ran towards me, her hands reaching out to grab the lapels of my jacket. She fell to her knees at my feet, clutching my legs just as she used to do when she was frightened by a thunderstorm as a child. "Babe, please," she sobbed, burying her face in my trousers. "Make it stop. Tell Mr. Volkov it was a mistake. Give him the house. Just give him the house, Daddy. Please save me. Why didn't you tell me about the trust? Why did you let me sign?" I looked down at her. I felt the warmth of her tears soaking into the fabric. A part of me, the part that had rocked her to sleep and bandaged her scraped knees, wanted to reach down and pull her up, wanted to step in front of Victor and offer him anything to spare her. But then I touched the pocket of my blazer. I felt the scarf inside, the scarf with the cigarette burn. I remembered the cold indifference in her voice the night before. I did not reach down. I did not stroke her hair. I stood rigid like a statue, carved from the cold, hard logic of justice. I leaned down slowly, bringing my face close to hers. "I asked you, Tiffany." I said, my voice low, but cutting through the chaos like a razor. "Last night at dinner. I sat right across from you. I asked you if you were sure. I asked you if the money was worth erasing your mother." I paused, letting the memory of her cruelty hang in the air between us. "You told me the past was dead," I continued. "You told me money was the only reality. You chose the money, Tiffany. You chose to ignore my warnings. You chose to treat me like a piece of furniture to be discarded." "But I didn't know," she wailed. "I didn't know I would go to jail." Ignorance of the law is not an excuse, I said, straightening up and pulling my leg away from her grasp. And ignorance of your father's intelligence was your fatal mistake. I gave you a choice. You made it. Now you have to live with it. I turned my back on her. It was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life, but it was necessary. She needed to see that the safety net was gone. She needed to fall. Victor had heard enough. He did not care about our family drama. He cared about retribution. He barked a command in Russian. "Get them!" he shouted. The two bodyguards moved with terrifying speed. They ignored the police chief's warning shots. They were professionals loyal only to the man who paid them. One of them lunged for Greg, grabbing him by the collar of his expensive shirt and hauling him to his feet as if he weighed nothing. Greg screamed, flailing his arms uselessly. The bodyguard drew back a fist, heavy with a gold ring, and drove it into Greg's stomach. The sound of the air leaving Greg's body was sickening. He doubled over, gasping. The other bodyguard moved toward Tiffany. He reached out his hand like a claw, grabbing her by the arm and jerking her away from me. She screamed a high, piercing sound that shattered the last remnants of peace in the house. Chief Miller roared his command. "Take them down, now!" The room exploded into chaos. Officers tackled the bodyguards. A taser deployed with a loud crack, and the smell of ozone filled the air. Victor roared, charging toward Greg himself, his hands outstretched, ready to strangle the life out of the boy who had insulted him. I stood in the center of the hurricane, leaning on my cane, watching the violence unfold. It was a scene from hell played out in paradise. Bodies crashing into furniture, glass shattering under heavy boots, screams of pain, and commands to freeze mixing into a cacophony of destruction. Greg was on the floor, curled into a ball, trying to protect his head as Victor kicked him. Tiffany was being shielded by an officer, while another struggled to subdue the bodyguard, who was thrashing like a wild animal. It was dangerous. It was terrifying. And it was exactly what needed to happen. They had wanted a life of excitement. They had wanted the thrill of high stakes. Well, here it was. This was the reality of the world they wanted to enter. A world without rules where the strong devour the weak. They were not apex predators as they had thought. They were just krill swimming in a shark tank. I watched as the police finally gained control. 4 officers pinned Victor to the ground. He was still shouting, cursing my family to the 7th generation. Greg was moaning, clutching his ribs, blood trickling from his lip. Tiffany was hyperventilating, her white dress torn and stained. They looked at me, all of them. And in their eyes I saw the dawn of a terrible understanding. The old man was not helpless. The old man was not a victim. The old man was the one who had opened the door to the tiger's cage and then stepped aside. I adjusted my jacket. I checked my watch. It was 9:20. The closing was over. The lesson had begun. The sirens outside reached a deafening crescendo, drowning out the sound of the ocean and the frantic sobbing in the room. It was the sound of reality crashing into the fantasy world my daughter and her boyfriend had tried to build. Chief Miller moved with the precision of a man who had seen too many crime scenes and had no patience for drama. He signaled to his officers, and they advanced a wall of blue uniforms and grim determination. Viktor Volkov was a violent man, but he was not stupid. He knew that a shootout with the police in a high-end neighborhood would bring down the kind of heat that not even his money could fix. He looked at the officers, then he looked at Greg, who was cowering at his feet. Victor took a deep breath, his chest expanding against his linen suit, and slowly unclenched his fists. He stepped back, raising his hands to shoulder height, in a gesture of mock surrender. But his eyes never left Greg. "You are lucky today, little man," Victor whispered, his voice low and calm, which made it infinitely more terrifying than his shouting. "The police will take you now, but they cannot keep you forever. And when you get out, I will be waiting. You owe me time. You owe me money. And I always collect. Greg whimpered, pulling his knees to his chest. He knew that prison was now the safest place for him. He practically crawled towards the nearest officer, holding his hands out, begging to be taken into custody. "Get him out of here," Chief Miller barked. Two officers hauled Greg to his feet. He hung limp between them, his legs dragging on the hardwood floor like a sack of wet laundry. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. Click, click. The sound was sharp and mechanical, marking the definitive end of his freedom. He did not look at Tiffany. He did not look at me. He kept his eyes squeezed shut, as if trying to wake up from a nightmare, but the cold steel biting into his skin was the only reality left. Then the officers turned their attention to Tiffany. She was pressed against the wall near the window, shaking so violently that her teeth chattered. When the female officer approached her, Tiffany flinched as if she had been burned. "Ms. Blake," the officer said, her voice firm but not unkind. "Please turn around and place your hands behind your back. You are under arrest for grand larceny, forgery, and conspiracy to commit fraud." "No," Tiffany gasped, shaking her head. "No, please. There has been a mistake. My father. He is right there. Ask him. Dad, tell them." She looked at me across the room. Her eyes were wide and filled with a desperate, pleading terror. She looked like the little girl who had broken a vase 20 years ago and wanted me to fix it. But this was not a broken vase. This was a broken law. This was a deliberate attempt to rob her own blood. I stood leaning on my cane, my face set in stone. I did not move. I did not speak. My silence was the answer she did not want to hear. The officer grabbed Tiffany's wrist. Tiffany screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of denial. "Don't touch me," she shrieked, struggling against the grip. "I didn't do anything. It was Greg. It was his idea. I am the victim here. Dad, why are you just standing there? Help me." The second officer stepped in, and together they forced her arms behind her back. The struggle was brief and undignified. The pristine white dress she had worn to look like an heiress was now rumpled and twisted. The sound of the handcuffs locking on her wrists seemed to echo louder than the sirens. "You have the right to remain silent." The officer began reciting the Miranda rights, the words flowing in a monotone rhythm that contrasted with Tiffany's hysterical crying. As they began to march her towards the door, she fought them. She dug her heels into the expensive rug she had tried to sell. She twisted her neck to look back at me one last time. "You are cruel," she screamed, her face contorted with hate. "You are a monster. How could you do this to your own daughter? You set me up. You planned this whole thing. You are evil." I watched her. I listened to every word. Each accusation felt like a physical blow, but I did not let it show. I did not let my expression waver. I am not the one who sold my mother's memory for a suitcase of cash, I thought to myself. I am not the one who tried to leave an old man homeless. I am not the one who forged a signature. I looked her in the eye, and for a brief second she stopped screaming. In that silence I hoped she saw the truth. I hoped she saw that this was not cruelty. This was consequences. This was the wall she had been running towards at full speed, despite all my warnings. "Take them away," Chief Miller ordered. The officers shoved them forward. I watched my only child being dragged out of the house she grew up in. I watched her stumbling through the front door into the bright morning sunlight, where the neighbors had surely gathered. I heard her screaming my name one last time, accusing me of heartlessness, before the heavy door of the police cruiser slammed shut, cutting off her voice. Viktor Volkov was being escorted out separately, his lawyers already on the phone. He stopped at the door and looked back at me. He nodded once, a gesture of respect from one shark to another. He knew I had beaten him. He knew I had used the law to do what he used violence to do. He walked out with his dignity intact, leaving the wreckage of my family behind. The room suddenly felt very large and very empty. The briefcase of money was gone, taken as evidence. The papers were gone. The people were gone. I stood alone in the center of the living room. The silence ringing in my ears was louder than the chaos had been. My legs finally gave way, and I sank onto the sofa. I looked at the spot where Tiffany had stood. I looked at the view of the ocean. I had won. The house was safe. The trust was secure. My assets were protected. But as the adrenaline faded, I felt the crushing weight of the victory. I had saved the house, but I had lost the home. I had taught her a lesson, but the tuition was her freedom. I closed my eyes and listened to the fading sirens. They were taking my daughter to a cell. And I was left here in my glass castle, surrounded by beautiful things and absolute silence. It was the right thing to do, I knew that, but knowing it did not make the house feel any less cold. The silence in the house was different now. It was no longer the heavy, oppressive silence of secrets and betrayal, but the clean, crisp silence of the ocean breeze moving through empty rooms. 1 week had passed since the police cars had flashed their lights in my driveway, and the chaos had swept away the debris of my family. I sat on the terrace, the same spot where Greg had hit his golf balls and Tiffany had sipped her champagne. But the air felt lighter today. I held a glass of Pinot Noir, Lydia's favorite vintage, swirling the dark red liquid, as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold. I had changed the locks the day after the arrest. I had hired a cleaning crew to scrub every inch of the house, not just to remove the physical dirt, but to scour away the memory of their presence. The smell of Greg's cheap cologne and the stain of Tiffany's greed were gone, replaced by the scent of salt and lavender. It was my house again. But as I sat there alone, I realized that a house without people is just a museum of what used to be. The sound of footsteps on the stone pavers broke my reverie. I did not turn around. I knew the heavy, measured tread of Arthur Caldwell. He walked out onto the patio carrying a leather folder tucked under his arm. He looked tired. His suit was rumpled and the lines on his face seemed deeper than usual. He pulled up a chair and sat down beside me, letting out a long sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire legal system. "It is done," Arthur said quietly. I took a sip of wine. The liquid was cool and smooth, but it did not wash away the lump in my throat. "Tell me," I said. Arthur opened the folder. The district attorney did not offer a plea deal. The evidence was too overwhelming. The recording you made at dinner, the forged deed, the testimony of the notary who flipped on them the moment he saw handcuffs. It was an open and shut case. He paused, looking out at the water. The judge sentenced Tiffany this afternoon. She got 8 years in a federal penitentiary. Minimum security perhaps, but still prison. She will be 40 years old when she gets out. 8 years. I closed my eyes. I tried to picture my daughter in a gray jumpsuit sleeping on a metal cot, eating food on a plastic tray. I tried to feel satisfaction, but all I felt was a dull, aching hollow in my chest. I had saved her from the immediate danger of Viktor Volkov, but I had not been able to save her from herself. "And Greg?" I asked. Arthur grimaced. "Greg is a different story. He is in the county lockup awaiting trial, but his bail was denied. It seems Viktor Volkov has friends even on the inside. 2 inmates beat Greg within an inch of his life yesterday in the showers. He is in the infirmary now. He is terrified, Harrison. He is begging to be put in solitary confinement. He knows that as long as he is in the system, he is a target. Victor does not forgive, and he does not forget." I nodded slowly. Greg wanted to play the big man. He wanted to live in a world of high stakes. Now he was living it. "And Victor?" I asked. "He is out on bail," Arthur said. "Expensive lawyers, but the fraud charges against him for money laundering are sticking. He will be tied up in court for years. He won't be bothering you again. You are radioactive to him now. He knows you are the one man he cannot intimidate." We sat in silence for a long time, watching the light fade from the sky. The waves crashed against the shore, a rhythmic reminder that time moves on regardless of our tragedies. "You know," Arthur said softly, closing the folder, "you could sell this place. You could take the money and travel. Go to Europe. Start over. Nobody would blame you. There are too many ghosts here." I looked back at the house. I saw the glass walls reflecting the twilight. I saw the shadow of the room where I had raised my daughter. I saw the kitchen where we had shared meals. Yes, there were ghosts, but running away would not exorcise them. "No, Arthur," I said. "I am not selling." Arthur looked surprised. "Then what will you do? Live here alone in this mausoleum?" I smiled a small, sad smile. "I have been thinking about what Tiffany said. She said I was a burden. She said old people are useless. She wanted to put me in a place where I would be forgotten." I turned to look at my old friend. "There are thousands of people like me, Arthur. Men and women who worked hard all their lives, who built families and fortunes, only to be discarded by the very children they raised. They are lonely. They are vulnerable. And they have nowhere to go where they are treated with dignity." I gestured to the house. "This place was built with love. It should be used for love. I am going to expand the mission of the Lydia Foundation. I want to turn the glass horizon into a sanctuary, a shelter for the elderly who have been abused or exploited by their families. I want to fill these rooms with people who have stories to tell. I want to give them the view, the peace, and the respect they deserve." Arthur stared at me for a moment, and then a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. "Lydia would have loved that," he said. "Yes," I said, feeling a warmth spread through my chest for the first time in days. "She would have." I finished my wine and set the glass down. The sun had completely vanished now, leaving the world in darkness. But in the darkness, the lights of the house began to flicker on one by one automatic sensors illuminating the empty rooms. They looked like beacons, beacons of hope. I stood up and walked to the edge of the terrace. The wind whipped at my jacket, but I did not feel the cold. I felt strong. I had lost my daughter. That pain would never truly go away. It was a scar I would carry to my grave. But I had not lost myself. I had faced the fire, and I had walked out the other side. "Blood is important," I whispered to the ocean. "But dignity is more important. I have lost my child, but I have found myself again. And in this house I will make sure that no other parent has to feel alone in the dark." Here is a lesson I learned from the hardest week of my life. We often think that family is a bond that can never be broken, that we must tolerate disrespect and abuse simply because we share DNA. But that is a lie. True family is built on respect, not just blood. You are not a bad parent for protecting your dignity. You are not a bad person for saying no to toxicity, even if it comes from your own children. Enabling their bad behavior does not help them, it only destroys you both. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let them face the consequences of their actions. Stand tall, protect your peace, and never let anyone make you feel guilty for demanding the respect you deserve. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever had to make a tough choice to protect yourself, please hit that subscribe button and share this video. You never know who might need to hear this message today. Leave a comment below and tell me your story. Let us build a community where we support each other. I am Harrison Blake, and thank you for listening.